Hello, my name is Shiva, and welcome to Bridge to Bharath. This is episode 1 of our 6-part mini series that acts as a practical playbook for global companies looking to explore, enter, and grow in India. If you haven't listened to episode 0 yet, I would recommend starting there. It gives you the big picture overview of where we are headed and why this conversation matters now. But if you are jumping in here, don't worry, we will get you up to speed quickly. Last week, headlines about 50% US tariffs on Indian goods were all over the place. Whether or not CEOs are calling emergency strategy meetings, I don't know. But I'm sure the question many people are asking is, does this change our India strategy? Should we pause our expansion, pull back our India investments? My take on this is that trade tensions, I think tension is a better word to describe it than trade war. Trade tensions operate on political cycles that are typically 2 to 4 years. But business fundamentals and competitive positioning operate on a much longer time frame, 10 to 20 years. So no, this should not pause your expansion and don't pull back on your investments. As far as changing your India strategy, if you don't have an India strategy yet, then yes, you should change your India strategy by having an India strategy. I'm going to argue that a period of short-term volatility, such as this one, is the best time to build long-term competitive advantage. Let me start with an analogy from real estate. When mortgage rates spike, most people say this is a terrible time to buy a house. But smart buyers know that high rate means fewer competing offers, motivated sellers, and in general better negotiating power. Sure, their monthly payment will be higher initially, but they are getting a better house in a better neighborhood than they could normally afford. When rates eventually drop, they can refinance, and it would turn out to be a great deal. Because market turbulence doesn't change the fact that people need a place to live, right? It just changes who gets the best opportunities. And my argument is that India is that high valued property that becomes more attractive, not less, during market turbulence. Let's look at why India is high valued. There are 4 fundamental reasons, 4 forces that make India uniquely positioned during these uncertain times. First, geopolitics. India is in a sweet spot here. India wants to be friends with everyone. It's one of the few large economies that maintain productive relationships across competing blocs without triggering Cold War tensions. Think of India as the friend everybody talks to. In high school, there's always that one person who could hang out with the football player, with the theater kids, and the debate team without anyone questioning her loyalty. But more than that, she was the friend who would share her lunch when you forgot yours, even if it meant going hungry herself. Now, you might think I'm exaggerating, but India proved this during COVID. When vaccines were the most precious commodity on earth and wealthy nations were holding supplies, India gave away millions of free doses to South Asia and Africa, even delaying its own vaccination program. As an Indian, I'm very proud of that. It was consistent with India's deep-rooted foundational belief that the whole world is one family. Today, when these countries are choosing technology partners or trade relationships, they remember who showed up when it mattered. Recent trade tensions haven't really changed this position. They've only made it more valuable. Also, when trade policies do create short-term friction, geopolitical security partnerships operate on different timelines. As an example, the Quad Strategy Alliance, US, Japan, India, and Australia have evolved from maritime security into coordinating semiconductor supply chains, AI governance standards, and clean energy infrastructure. India isn't just participating, it's co architecting these frameworks with the other countries. Next, supply chains. Trade tensions don't really cancel supply chain diversification. They have, in fact, validate it and pull it forward. For example, the US China tariffs in 2018 were supposed to reshape global manufacturing. Instead, they accelerated the China plus one strategies that US companies were already considering. Supply chains didn't retreat, they evolved. The EU's various trade disputes over the past decade followed similar patterns. Short term friction followed by more sophisticated, diversified supply chain architectures. Current India tariffs would follow the same playbook. Policy volatility would force companies to think more strategically, not less globally, evolving the China plus one strategy to perhaps an India plus many strategy. Let's use Apple as an example. In 2018, Apple manufactured zero iPhones in India. But by 2024, they were producing $7 billion worth annually, with plans to hit $40 billion by the end of this year. And Apple isn't just moving assembly lines. They are building an entire supply ecosystem that's resilient to policy shocks. With the result that Apple's India-made iPhones are now exported globally, creating options and choices for the company that protect them regardless of which way policy winds blow. Being part of the supply chain also brings additional secondary opportunities which can grow legs of their own. For example, Boeing sources $2 billion worth of components annually from Indian suppliers. But their engineering center in Chennai co-designs aircraft systems with Seattle. That means core avionics and flight control systems, not just cost optimization. So the modern supply chain strategic trend isn't about replacing a single country. It's about parallel capabilities. And India offers something unique as a contributor to that parallelism, the ability to serve both developed and emerging markets from the same manufacturing base. There is also the supply chain competitive advantage that India brings being a democracy. For regulated, critical infrastructure buyers, sourcing from rule of law democracies isn't just a preference, it's often a requirement. And India's positioning as the world's largest democracy with increasingly sophisticated manufacturing capabilities makes it more valuable during periods of great power competition. The third asset is workforce talent. India now graduates 1.5 million engineers annually. An increasingly larger percentage of them are building global products from day one. For example, Flipkart's engineering team designs e-commerce systems used by Walmart globally. These aren't just outsourced development centers, they are global product hubs. The underlying advantage is what we can call the frugal innovation advantage. That is, Indian engineers are learning to build for constraints, limited bandwidth, intermittent power, diverse languages, price sensitivity. So as global markets become more complex and resource conscious, these constraint-based design skills become competitive advantages. It's like learning to drive in New York City. If you can handle Manhattan traffic, you can drive anywhere in the US. The skills a company develops navigating India's complexity makes its product work better globally. You're not just building for different markets, you're building products that work everywhere. Finally, infrastructure, which is the backbone that makes it all possible. India's infrastructure isn't just improving, it's leapfrogging in ways that matter for global business. I'll give you 3 data points that support this argument. Number 1, UPI. India processed 90 billion UPI transactions last year, more than the US, UK, EU, and China combined. China was a distant second with 17 billion. And India does it with 99.5% uptime. It's proof that India can operate digital infrastructure at a global scale, and companies building on Indian digital rails get access to tested, scalable systems. Number two, logistics. The logistics revolution in India doesn't get talked about much, but it's showing remarkable, measurable progress. India's average shipping time from manufacturing to port dropped from 14 days in 2019 to just 6 days in 2024. For manufacturing companies, this means India can compete on speed, not just cost. Number three, renewable energy. India added 50 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity in the past 2 years, more than Germany's total installed solar capacity. For energy-intensive manufacturing, India increasingly offers cleaner power at competitive prices. So there we have it. Geopolitics, supply chain, workforce, infrastructure. Those are the trade tension resistant strengths that make India a high value property during volatile times. So we have established why India is prime real estate. Great location, solid infrastructure, room to grow, and modern systems. But here's the key question. Once you own this property, how do you actually use it to build wealth? Companies that are leveraging these strengths use three strategic approaches. The first one is what we can call the global hub strategy. It treats India as the round-the-clock global operations center. Companies like Adobe use India not just for lower costs, but for 24/7 global operations. The Bangalore team leads product development for global markets, taking advantage of time zone differences for continuous development cycles. So Adobe's distributed operations become a competitive mode, and global hubs become more valuable during uncertain times, not less. The second is the innovation partnership strategy. It co-creates solutions with Indian partners that work globally. Schneider Electric's India operation, for example, doesn't just manufacture. It co-develops smart grid technologies with governmental agencies, then exports these solutions to other emerging markets. So they've turned local complexity into global competitive advantage, thereby building genuine innovation partnerships that create differentiated capabilities that you can't really get anywhere else. The third is the market laboratory strategy. It uses India's complexity as a proving ground for global expansion. For example, Netflix uses India as a testing ground for affordable pricing models, mobile-first content, and rural distribution strategies that they then adopt for other emerging markets. So India's diversity, multiple languages, income levels, infrastructure realities, makes it the perfect laboratory for global scaling strategies. So if your product works in India, it'll work in most other emerging markets. Each of these approaches creates strategic options and competitive differentiation that transcend single country risks. Notice what's missing from these strategies? None of them is really about cost savings or traditional outsourcing. None of them has anything to do with tariffs, trade tensions, or policy cycles. Adobe isn't running 24/7 operations to save money. They're doing it to build products faster than competitors. Schneider Electric isn't co-developing in India because of labor arbitrage. They're doing it because Indian infrastructure challenges create innovations that work globally. Netflix isn't testing in India to access cheap content. They're doing it because India's complexity makes their global expansion strategies bulletproof. So the question for your company isn't whether India is a cost center or new market to enter. Those are legitimate and obvious reasons. The larger question, though, is which combination of global hub, innovation partnerships, and market laboratory strategies could give you capabilities your competitors don't have? Because that's what transforms uncertainty into competitive advantage. The companies that will win over the next decades aren't going to be the one avoiding regions due to short-term policy volatility. They will be the one building resilient, globally distributed capabilities that can thrive regardless of which way political winds blow. Bottom line, no, the recent events haven't changed the destination. On the contrary, they've made the India journey more relevant, more timely, and urgent. Like in the housing market, just like high interest rate periods, these windows of reduced competition and better positioning won't last forever. When the rates drop, in our case, when trade tensions ease and everyone rushes back in, the best positions in India will already be taken by companies that moved during the uncertainty. In other words, tariffs are not a stop sign. They are a race starter's pistol. In our next episode, my co-host Manjunath will dive deeper into the operational reality of New India. He will explore the digital infrastructure revolution that's making 72-hour company setups possible, the innovation ecosystem that's emerged from India's cities, and how this digitally native business environment often works better than what companies have at home. Because once you understand why India matters strategically, the next step is to understand how business actually gets done here. Until then, this is Bridge to Bharath.